Putin and NATO don't agree on much, it seems, but they both can agree on one thing. That is that Russia is not going to be taking Kharkiv. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about why Putin is reversing course on his tactical objective. Okay, so this is what I think one of the most interesting stories that I've seen. Putin has come out and said Russia doesn't want to capture Kharkiv as his troops advance. But he says, actually, what we did want is just to create a buffer zone between the Kharkiv region and Belgorod. And this is actually kind of in some ways exactly what Ukraine wanted from the start by empowering the Freedom of Russia Legion, to force Russia to reposition large numbers of its forces and prevent them from concentrating, particularly in the east, where they would be more vulnerable. But according to Putin on a video on a Kremlin website, he says, because when it comes to what is happening around Kharkiv, that's their fault too, because they have been shelling and continue to target residential neighborhoods in the border areas, including Belgorod. And he says, as I've said publicly, that if this will continue, we'll be forced to create a safe zone, a sanitary zone. That's what we're doing. He says, as for Kharkiv, we have no such plans to capture it today, which is always funny when it's like, yeah, obviously you're not capturing it today. But I thought this was even more interesting because Putin has been dropping a few times these hints where he talks about a sanitary zone. And I think this is his way of floating an idea into the public sphere of a kind of version of not a surrender, but he's stating what he would view as an acceptable condition on his end of the Russo-Ukrainian war, is my theory. And that is, of course, that he wants to create a North Korean-style demilitarized zone. And what he may say is, listen, I actually want this zone to extend in the Ukrainian border, a certain distance. But I think that's what he's trying to do. I think he's trying to signal to the West by saying these things and emphasizing this sanitary zone, because he's used that same phrasing in several different statements, in several different contexts about Russia's desire for this. And I think it's a recognition by him that he's not going to get more territory, but what he may be able to achieve would be some sort of buffer zone in which Ukraine and Russia agree to a North Korea, South Korea style DMZ, separating the two countries. Now, do I think this could be just a Russian trick to get the Ukrainians to pull back from border regions only for Russia to move in and occupy them? I think that's very, very possible. That would follow kind of Russia's playbook for a lot of their negotiated settlements, negotiated ceasefires. But it still is a sign, I think, a signal from Putin that even though he won't say it explicitly, he is growing tired of the war and is starting to acknowledge at least what kind of his exits might look like. But what's also interesting is that NATO says the same thing about Kharkiv. NATO says Russian troop numbers insufficient for a Kharkiv breakthrough. This is coming, of course, from the General Christopher Cavoli, NATO's supreme allied commander in Europe. And he said he's confident Ukrainian forces are going to hold their lines in the region, which, again, if you follow this channel, you didn't need him to tell you this. You know that on the live stream last week, we ran some math, and we're actually going to run it here in a second. And I'll explain to you just why, mathematically, it is almost impossible for Russia to seize Kharkiv. He says, quote, the Russians don't have the numbers necessary to do a strategic breakthrough. More to the point, they don't have the skill and capabilities to do it, to operate at the scale necessary to exploit any breakthrough to strategic advantage. He says they do have the ability to make some local advances, and they've done some of that, and they also have had some local losses, but there's no figures provided. Admiral Bauer, chair of NATO's military committee, told the press conference he expected, quote, serious improvements soon in the amount of ammunition Ukrainian forces are receiving. We've talked about that, right? They've gotten a short-term emergency aid, but to get a real pipeline flowing, it's the difference between watering your plants and building a river in your backyard, right? Watering your plants, you can do quickly, but if your goal is to, change the landscape, it's going to take more time, right? You have to build out sort of the literal canals that the water's going to flow through. Logistics, no different. You can get quick short-term aid to the front, but if you want real sustained logistical assistance, you've got to build out these logistics chains, build out these pipelines and systems to get aid to the front consistently. He said Ukraine's allies are now shipping vast amounts of ammunition and short-range air defense system and significant amounts of armored vehicles that would help Kiev fight. Right? He said, I'm in close contact with our Ukrainian colleagues, and I'm confident they will hold the line. So here's all. I want to give you guys this explanation. Okay. So in this war, in a war of attrition, right? So in a maneuver war, you can oftentimes encircle a city, cut it off, and isolate the defenders and destroy them, right? Sometimes with disproportionately small forces. Small, highly mobile forces can take large swaths of territory. If they get into an enemy's backfield, they can conduct a rout, right? But in an attrition war, where you never gain that tremendous maneuver advantage, right? Where neither side has the speed necessary to outmaneuver the other, you end up with a pretty simple type of math. Now, you can see here in the Battle of Bachman, right? Bachman is a town of a certain size, and Russia slowly had to achieve positions on either flank and then sort of push into central Bachman, right? That was their MO. And they ran that same playbook. They ran it in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, but they also ran it in Avdiivka, right? You might recall within Avdiivka, Russian forces pushed hard, occupying either flank, and then pushed through the center once the logistics lines were isolated. That is the Russian playbook at this point. Now, if they need to, and it's not just a Russian playbook. That is the playbook in an attrition-based war, which we have now settled into. So if you wanted to do that in Kharkiv, you can estimate the number of casualties they're likely to take, right? We have a fair amount of data. So when you look at the Battle of Bachman, for example, the Western estimate says that Russia, in order to seize Bachman, expended about 60,000 total casualties with around 20,000 KIA. So we're going to use the casualties number. So you're looking at about 60K, right? And the population of Bachman, right? Before the war, the pre-war population was about 71,000, right? So we're just going to round the math off because we're doing some estimates here. And we're going to say 1-to-1. You took about one casualty for every one pre-war resident of a city. And the reason I'm using this ratio is because cities don't all share the same shape, but fighting in an urban area is comparably difficult, right? You could see Bachman not that dense in the center. If it was more dense, it would be harder to clear each city block, but it's got a lot of sprawl. And the total occupancy, the total size of a city is best measured in population, not, for example, in area. Again, like, imagine how long it would take to clear one skyscraper in Manhattan, right? Going floor by floor. It'd be impossible. It wouldn't be impossible. It would just take a long, long time. And there's not really skyscrapers in Bachman. That's why we're using population as a metric and not area. So, okay, Battle of Bachman, Russia needed about one casualty for every one pre-war resident. Now, we look at the Battle of Avdiivka, and we say per Ukraine, they said about 45,000 KIA. Ukraine, it's a little heavy, right? But the Avdiivka pre-war population was about 31,000. So if we assume Ukraine's bumping their casualty estimates up a little bit, then you're going to see about, again, 1-to-1. So if you want to seize a city in an attrition-style warfare, in this conflict, you're going to have to take about one casualty for every one pre-war resident. What does that mean? That means that Kharkiv population 2021 should give us a rough estimate of the casualties that Ukraine would be looking at to seize this city. And the number we get, 1.4 million, guys. Russia is going to have to find 1.4 million additional troops to seize Kharkiv. And when you take a look at the map, it becomes eminently obvious why this is the case, right? Zoom into Kharkiv. Actually, let's get the map with the best. So Volchansk, right? Here's Volchansk. This is a city where Russia's main attack force is stalled out, right? Cannot seem to get it together to seize. Now let's go into Kharkiv, right? This is downtown Kharkiv, guys. Imagine, no, I'm sorry, that's not even downtown. This is downtown Kharkiv, right? It's got rivers, it has buildings, it has streets, it has just residential districts, it has medical districts, it has a stadium. Look, imagine you're a Russian commander and you have just a few thousand troops to seize this city. And that's just seizing the city itself, right? The requisites are to establish control over the flanks. But when you zoom out, you see that Kharkiv is it's such a huge city that the flanks of Kharkiv are dozens of kilometers apart. So you're talking about huge sizes of breakthroughs. I mean, you can see the Kharkiv suburbs. Look, to get to the flanks of Kharkiv, you're looking at a whole different town, right? So you might go from here, and then it looks like the other flank is about here, 17 kilometers wide. To just to flank the city, right? So you see why this is a massive strategic task for Russia, and is probably not possible in this war entirely, unless Russia could somehow. The only way would be if Russia instituted a general draft. If all military-age men and a lot of able-bodied women were rounded up and put into this conflict, right? They would need, again, about my estimate would be about 1.4 million is at least the starting point to have this conversation. So this is why NATO is saying these things. And this is why Putin himself acknowledges that it's not likely to happen, because he's starting to accept the fact that in this war, there's a limit to what Russia can do, even with its defense industrial base ramped up, even with its non-conscription recruitment drive running at full bore. It can only bring in about 30,000 people a month, right? So do the math with me, guys. You see that they need, to get the 1.4 million men they would need to have to seize. And that's the casualties, by the way. That's not the size of the army conducting the operation, right? So if you're going to take 1.4 million casualties, you probably need a force of around 2 million at least, probably more. Again, to be clear, Ukraine also takes significant casualties in those fights, but the difference is when you have to seize a city, right? Ukraine wins if Russia stops trying, right? Whereas Russia loses if they stop moving to seize these areas. So for some perspective, let's say Putin needed his 2 million man army to seize Kharkiv in this attrition warfare situation, and he was able to mobilize the Russian state, currently about 30,000 people a month, meaning he needs, around 6 years of mobilization with no casualties, no attrition, before he would be ready to take on Kharkiv, which is not even the largest Ukrainian city, right? So, again, guys, that I think is why we're seeing both sides, but particularly Putin, acknowledge that there is a limit with the war as it's currently executed. There's a limit in what's possible. And again, I find it interesting that there is, of course, an acknowledgement, right? Yesterday, Zelensky stressed in an interview with ABC News that the situation in Kharkiv is very serious. Agreed. That Ukrainian forces cannot afford to lose Kharkiv city. Agreed. But Zelensky said Russia can't seize Kharkiv city if Ukrainian forces get 2 Patriot air defense systems to deploy to the area. I think that statement is incorrect. I think the provision of Patriots is not the thing that will decide. Again, in the Battle of Avdiivka, which, to be clear, like Russia won because they were able to employ their close air support systems much closer to the front line due to the shortage of Ukrainian air defense systems. That is all true. But I guess it would be possible to lose Kharkiv in the sense that Russia could like just bomb it into glass if it had no air defenses. But it's a sort of a stretch to think that Russia, again, in any set of scenarios, is realistically going to seize Kharkiv with the purportedly this offensive in the Vovchansk region. 50,000 troops is the estimate. And the general opinion of a lot of analysts is that this was actually launched prematurely. Or before Russia was fully ready. I think Russia realized that every week it waited, Ukraine was going to get more Western aid, and Ukraine's forces were getting stronger faster than Russia's forces were getting prepared. And so they simply launched with what they have, likely scaling back their objectives heavily, moving them again into somewhere like Vovchansk instead of like we talked about, trying to take Kharkiv proper, which Russia may have been delusional enough to actually believe they could pull off. So the only other thing I wanted to add, of course, guys, if you feel like your life's objectives, I don't know, are too, don't be Putin, man. Don't be Putin, right? If you're going to do something, make sure you have the energy and the focus that you need to get it done. And if you need a little bit of help, that's why I created Strike Gum, inspired by my time in Afghanistan when I had to drink a bunch of gross energy drinks when I would patrol around Nangarhar province. And if you've ever had an energy drink in 125-degree heat, you know it's like literally so disgusting, it's almost traumatizing. That's why 12 years on, I've created Strike Gum. It's a refreshing mint flavor. There's no sugar, right? It's got 100 milligrams of alpha GPC and 90 milligrams of caffeine, the perfect combination for energy and mental focus and clarity, right? Each one of these pieces has the caffeine of a Red Bull or an Amp Energy, and there's 5 of them in a pack. We've actually just rolled out our 5-pack for sale. So now, if you want to get that sweet spot, right, where you're like, hey, it's not worth it for me to pay shipping to order a pack, and the $70 pack is too much for me to try it out, the 5-pack is exactly what you want. But it's only available on strikegum.com. But if you want to order the other stuff, it is available on amazon.com. So you should definitely check that out as well. So thanks to everyone that supported us, everybody that's left us 5-star reviews on all the platforms, especially Amazon. You know that makes a huge difference. And thanks to our Colonel tier members at combatvetnews.com. Check us out. New video dropped yesterday. See ya. Cheers.